Well, I am so excited to be here in India. It's my first time, Namushka, and I love it. And I'm so excited for what you all are doing at the India Autism Center. Not only is this needed in India, it is needed all over the world. I've been very fortunate to be able to work in this field, specifically on housing, for the last 10 years. Madison House Autism Foundation, because of Jalyn Prince, has really invested a lot of money and research time into looking at what's available, what's working, what are the lessons learned, how can we help people develop housing faster, more efficiently, and in a more person-centered way. So I hope to give you a little bit of a glimpse about that in my time with you, but typically my presentations are about 3 hours, so 30 minutes is really tough. Just to set expectations, we're going to look at the big picture. We're going to look at what are the challenges, the major challenges that I feel you really want to pay attention to, what are different property types and service delivery models, what we've learned, what are some of the best practices that you should consider as you move forward into looking at housing solutions, and what is it that you can do today to prepare people for the future where they will no longer live with their family, but will live in their own home. Housing is the core of everything. If you find a job, if you find a faith community, if you find friends, but you don't have housing and you have to move from your community to access housing, all of that work and energy has just been depleted. And so being able to have the India Autism Center house everything in one place is one really fantastic solution. Right? Because if you can secure one's housing and then build all of their support systems around that, as long as that housing is secure, all of these little things can change as needed, but that person's core stability will still be there. This is a huge topic, but there are certain themes that are really important to think about. One, you have to have a variety of choices, because one size doesn't fit all. What's going to work for your son is going to be very different to your daughter and to your son. And so although the India Autism Center is creating one option, you're going to need a lot more, because we're going to need variety, because people are different. It's important that sometimes we need to fix the environment instead of fixing the people. With autism, there's a lot of sensory challenges, right? And you can do a lot of sensory integration therapy, occupational therapy, behavioral therapy, but if all you needed to do was change the light bulb to an LED, sometimes it's a lot easier to fix an environment instead of focusing so much time and energy into trying to fix people. Just look around. Person-centered thinking. This means that instead of creating programs where we're trying to fit people into these programs that have already been created, what if we thought about the person at the center and then we decided to build the support system around that person? It's a different paradigm shift. It's a different way of thinking about programming for this population, but it's something that I would like to encourage you to consider, because what if you only had 3 or 4 life choices? Wouldn't you feel constricted? Wouldn't you feel as if you were missing out? Maybe your talents and your gifts aren't in one of those 4 boxes. Then what? It's important that we think about that person first, and we individualize and we build the support system around the individual. And then always presume competence. Just because someone can't speak, just because you think they're in their own world, they're stemming all the time, or you think that they're not listening to you, you don't know how much they understand. They could understand everything. Technology now is providing the opportunity for people to have communication. And what we're finding is that there's people with autism who cannot speak, who look like they're in their own world. And once they're given the technology or the ability to communicate besides verbal communication, They do not have an intellectual disability. They heard you the whole time. So those times when you were talking to the other teacher about what he's doing and how bad it was and how come he can't learn, he heard and understood those things. So it's really important that we start to think about always presuming competence. There's a lot of challenges that even us in the States are certainly facing. There's long wait lists for services. Yes, we have funding, but it comes with a lot of red tape. I'm constantly having to deal with regulations and helping parents understand what their rights are and how they could navigate this very complicated funding system. Unemployment, we have already talked about. Something that's really important is loneliness. People are very lonely. Adults are very lonely on the autism spectrum. And if I was a betting woman, I would say that that could be a huge contributor of the fact of there's a higher incidence of suicide in the autistic population. It's very important that we think about friendship when we're thinking about housing. It's not just about creating the housing and closing someone in and creating this place of safety. You also want to be able to create and educate the broader community so that it's the broader community that is going to ensure the safety of the person, because they're always watching. And if somebody starts to harass or treat this person with ill will, it is the community that will rally around them and protect them and keep them safe. So, property types. Housing can be done in all different ways. If you have a home, a single family home, you can add an accessory dwelling. You can make a room that has an extra entrance. You could put another, a mother-in-law suite or a granny pad. I don't know if these terms are here in India or not, but taking a house that you already have and just adding something extra where the individual with autism can live, but still have that privacy, right? They begin to have that separation from family, yet at the same time, family is very close. The great thing about this is once family moves on, then you could rent that home, and then that's an income stream potentially for the individual, as well as a safety net, a support system. Scattered site apartments, right? People with autism could live in an apartment building, right? They could live with roommates in a home that are separated out in the community. Creating a co-housing community. Co-housing means that families are coming together to build a neighborhood where they want to live together and support one another. That's co-housing, where people are investing and building in a neighborhood together. A planned community with built-in supports could be an apartment or it could be homes in which it's not just specially designed housing, but there's also extra supports built into that housing. And then a live-work-play community is a community that includes employment options. So an individual has the opportunity to be able to do everything they need on one campus, on one property, but it's also important that they have the opportunity to continue to engage the greater community as well. So you have this housing, right? You decide on what housing is going to work best for this particular individual, right? But they're going to need support. They're going to need people to assist them. Well, what does that look like? Well, it could happen in a lot of different ways. One is being able to have agency-based rotational staffing. And what that means is that if an individual lives in a home, then that means different people every 8 hours could come in and support them as needed. So they might have 10 caregivers in a week coming in and rotating hourly through staffing. Or maybe they just need drop-in support. Maybe they can be by themselves sometimes and they just need drop-in support. That's rotational staffing. The other option is a host home. That means an individual with a disability lives with an individual that doesn't have a disability, and that individual without the disability is providing direct support to that individual. I am a host home. I used to be a host home. A man with autism lived with me. I was responsible for making sure that he went to the dentist, that he had transportation to get to his job, that he was able to see friends. I managed his health care so that he had that extra set of eyes. I helped him with all kinds of things. I made sure he ate good food. I made sure he was sleeping well. He was not just a roommate. I was his support system. I was his not his mother, because I'm too young. No, just kidding. But I helped him in a very intimate way. But that doesn't have to be the only support. You can also have a roommate that doesn't have direct support responsibilities. They're just a roommate. They're just another set of eyes, right? So you can have a host home arrangement, or you can have a roommate in which they're not taking care of the person's health care and transportation and everything, but they are a friend, right? And then there's self-directed services, and that means a family, instead of relying on an agency, a family is the one who identifies someone who they would like to be the caregiver. They're the ones who train them. There's the ones who keep up on all of the scheduling, right? It's self-directed. It gives people a lot of choice, but it's also very time-consuming to do that, right? And then an intentional community. When you build a live, work, play community, a co-housing community, or a planned community, you have people around you that aren't just the neighbor that moved in because there was an open flat, but they want to be your neighbor. It's intentional community. You want to live with people who are neurodiverse. If you go to the Autism Housing Network, I have a 5-part video series that explains 18 different models of housing and support. If you're interested in a lot more detail, I suggest you take a look at that video series. So what are some of the best practices? I've gone all over my country, the US, and to a few other countries, and one of the things that I have realized is it is so important to develop a culture, and especially right now, you are at this place where you're just emerging, and so you have the opportunity to shape the language, to be able to shape the perspective. You know, a long time ago, it was that people with disabilities, they needed to be cared for by the professionals, and it was a very hierarchical relationship. And you can decide to train your staff and it be that hierarchical relationship, or you can decide to do training where things are a little bit more equalized, where that person isn't someone that I'm looking down and telling what to do all the time, but that they are a friend and we are doing things together, right? So thinking about, how do you want your staff to be trained? How do you want the relationship to be between the people who get paid to support someone and then the individual on the autism spectrum? Stigma. The language we use can either increase or decrease stigma, right? So if you were at a job site, right, Nish decides to get somebody a job, and they say, okay, see you later, I'm gonna go back to my facility now, that means something, then hey, see you later, I'm gonna go back home now. Can you see the difference? Do you feel the difference? It's important that you decide here in India what these words are gonna mean. What are the words that are you going to use? Are the words that you use reflecting what the neurotypical population would be using, or are they continuing to show an otherness? This is very difficult to decide. And another really important part about culture building, it's very easy for families to want to do everything for their loved one. For them to say, I'm not, you know, my son, my daughter lives with me. I would never, ever kick them out of my house and have them go live on their own. But what I have seen, and from what I have learned, when people leave their family home who have disabilities, they grow. Just like neurotypical people, when I left my home and I went to college, I grew as a human being, right? It's the same thing for this population. So I want to encourage you to think about that. Is it best for your son or daughter to keep them with you and you guys grow old and dependent on each other, or should you be letting them leave the nest earlier? That's for you to decide. Another thing that's very important is that you teach people with disabilities to speak up for themselves. It is important for parent advocates to constantly be there and on top of things, but what happens when you leave? Are the people around them going to listen to their voice? Does your son or daughter know how to advocate? Do they know how to say no? Yes, this is what I want. Is there some sort of communication? Are they empowered? Do they have the confidence to be able to move forward in their life as an adult? It's really important that you are not doing too much for your loved ones, but that you are allowing them to grow as individual people. Another best practice is neurodiversity. And that just means neurodiversity is people with lots of different neurological orientations. This is a video that I would like to show that shows a little bit of a specific culture, as well as what happens when people with and without disabilities decide to live together and have neurodiverse relationships.
Most people look at people with disabilities and they see a charity case. They see someone who's going to need support for the rest of their life, and that's potentially a drain on the economy, and if they don't have a personal connection to it through family, it's a problem to be solved. L'Arche flips that notion upside down. When we gather around vulnerability as the core of community, we're all enriched by it. It's a generative source of community building. And in a time when we're so divided, what could be more needed?
So tonight we're celebrate Mark Bergen's 24th birthday.
When you first introduce the concept of L'Arche to people, they most naturally gravitate to the idea of a group home. Oh, so you're a group home. And I always have to say, sort of. L'Arche is a community of people with and without disabilities, joining in mission to create a more inclusive world for all.
L'Arche communities are in 35
in L'Arche,
countries.
who loves Terry?
Yeah,
Who loves Terry?
yeah, I love Terry.
A lot of people love Terry.
I am.
Yeah, you love Terry?
Yeah,
Does Joe love Terry?
yeah,
Does Liz love Terry?
yeah.
Who else loves Terry?
Oh, I know everybody loves it.
Everybody loves Terry.
Terry and I got close really quickly when I moved into the house. I feel like he's one of the people that I'm closest to in my life, and just someone that I most trust with really personal things, and also someone I've traveled with a fair amount. Yeah, just someone I really admire and really love being around. I think even when you have a lot of people around you, you can feel alone, and with Terry around, it's just impossible to feel that way because he cares so much about you and he is so aware of your feelings and where you're at, and he can always make you laugh. L'Arche is different because it's not about service, it's not about charity, it's not about taking care of people. It's more about entering into relationships with each other and about learning and growing together.
The assistants who come to live in our communities, the people without disabilities, they're not welcomed into the community primarily to serve. They're not giving to people with disabilities who don't have anything. They're entering into mutual relationship as equals but different, receiving from each other, giving to each other, and that give and take is the magic of L'Arche.
L'Arche is about hanging out. It's not about giving. It's about being with other people. And it's kind of sad that we live in a world where sometimes it's really hard to do, and it's really easy here.
It's simple.
people with disabilities have gifts and you need those gifts. That's it.
Love is at the heart of what we do in L'Arche and why we do what we do in L'Arche. And a core question that everyone asks is, am I lovable? And the answer is infinitely yes. And L'Arche is a place where people with disabilities who, whether explicitly or unconsciously, receive messages from society that say you're not lovable and you're not worth participating and being involved in society and being in community, that absolutely you are, and absolutely you're lovable. And in fact, loving you is a pleasure, loving you is a privilege, being loved by you is a privilege. Anywhere there's the potential to have a relationship with someone with disability, it's a worthy endeavor. It's a beautiful and precious thing.
The L'Arche little tagline, I am trying to make it be my life tagline of imagine community differently. Because we can, you know? In a world that's so broken in so many ways, here's a group of people with and without disabilities who are doing that, who are creating a real and mutual community. And I think we all can do that. And this is a model.
So that's a very specific model with a very specific focus and a very specific property type. And so what's important is that you start to think about, well, what is my model going to look like? Is that going to be the culture that I'm creating? Or maybe what the culture your family needs or the people in your community need is more of an independent living culture. If you watch the videos that are on the virtual tour, I show many videos of lots of different residential options, and you'll start to see all the different cultures that are out there. And it's really important that you start to think about, what are the words we're going to use? How are we going to have relationships with one another? How am I going to model what I want the future to be for this population? Another best practice is using design, right, to be able to create an environment that just produces social interaction and is more accessible to people with cognitive challenges. A lot of people with autism also have difficulty reading. So if everything was in a text, in written format, you know, they're going to be excluded from that environment. So if you add visuals to an environment, it's going to be more inclusive, it's going to be more accessible. People with autism sometimes have a difficult time being able to identify who they would want to hang out with, give them a call or text to schedule something, stick to the schedule, and then have to deal with the anxiety of going to hang out with that person, right? That's a lot of social skills that got to get learned. But if you created community, if you designed community with places where you can have soft social interactions, and it could be as simple as, in the US, a little basketball court, because basketball is a popular sport there. You know, you have to decide what are some of those places for soft social interaction. It could be just a group of benches sitting there. A lot of people with autism want to engage in friendship, but sometimes a party with the music and the movement and the sounds and everything is just is sensory overload. So if you created levels of interaction within the design, then people maybe could sit on the outskirts of a party, they'd still be included, they'd still be part of it, but it's accessible to them because it's not overwhelming. They don't have to be right in the middle of everyone. They can have that space. And maybe they can get up and join the party for a while, but they just need to be able to retract as needed. So creating levels of interaction is important. I'll show you some examples in the pictures. Making sure that things are very decluttered, right? My roommate on the spectrum, keeping his room clean was a challenge. And I said, Daniel, when your room is messy, you're like super anxious and you can't get anything done. If you have a clean room, you'll have a clean mind. And he got that. Because sometimes that visual onslaught can make things kind of jumbled up in your mind. And so when you're designing for housing, make sure there's a lot of storage space where you can put things away and close it. This way things look sleek. I noticed that your architects had used the Advancing Full Spectrum. They have a lot of good outlines. Making sure that noises, right? Sometimes people on the autism spectrum, they'll stomp around, or maybe they do a lot of bouncing. Well, if you have an apartment building and there's someone stomping and bouncing on top of you, it's going to be really annoying really fast, right? And it's going to create tension. So making sure that when you're designing something, you're designing durability and soundproofing so that you're not creating an opportunity that's going to create tension in your community in the future. Being pedestrian oriented. That means that instead of having roads and cars, sometimes people on the autism spectrum have a really difficult time being able to tell if there's a car coming, or maybe they just won't look because they're just not there yet. You know, designing so that cars stay on the periphery and people will have to walk, not only does that create a safe place for people with autism who can't understand crossing the road, but it also creates more opportunities for seeing people, that soft social interaction again. And then visuals, visuals, visuals. It's fantastic that you're starting already with your center and the school, because the visuals that you create, the teaching methodologies that you use can continue into adulthood. That continuity is huge. So teachers, if you're in here, thinking about how can you create visuals for getting dressed, you know, and then being able to give those visuals to parents so that that person can start to practice getting dressed by themselves. The other reason why visuals are so important is because if you can do either auditory or visual prompting, then you don't have to have a human being in your room all the time saying, you have to do this, you have to do that, pick up your clothes, put your pants legs on, pull it up. You know, I would get annoyed if someone was constantly telling me what to do. I need the prompting, right? Someone on the spectrum might need the prompting, but do they need a human being to do the prompting? You can use visuals and technology is my next best practice to be talking about. How can we use technology to make sure people are going to be more independent? For people who have seizures, there's high comorbidity for seizures. You can have seizure mats on the bed, you can have seizure mats on the floor, and it can be set to an alert so that it alerts somebody if someone's having a seizure in their bed or on the floor. Cooking stoves, if you're going to have cooking stoves, you might be afraid that someone's going to leave it on. But there's cooking stoves now that has a sensor. So if the stove is on and no one's moving in front of that stove, it's going to automatically shut off. Using things like Alexa or Google Home, being able to set prompts, right? Maybe every morning at 8 o'clock, it says, good morning, have you brushed your teeth yet? Or good morning, your ride is coming in 5 minutes. Your ride is coming in 3 minutes. You know, having technology be able to do some of the prompting, it decreases the cost of direct support staff and it increases the ability for the individual to feel more independent. Identifor is a really cool tool that I was recently introduced to. And what they have done is they've created this assessment tool that uses video games. And what I really like about Identifor is that it's strength-based. A lot of what we talk about is very much deficit-based, what the person can't do, right? When we're doing assessments, it's always assessing what they can't do. Well, this tool assesses what they can do. And the tool is a video game. Right? So, and it uses 3 different areas to be able to identify the multiple intelligences of that person. But what this tool also comes with is a human being on a phone, an Abby. So someone on the spectrum can say, hey, Abby, how do I tell someone hello? Right? Or how do I find this? And Abby, right, artificial intelligence, will help them be able to navigate the world. It'll give them tips. So what can you do right now? Start creating a person-centered plan. And when all possible, include the person with autism in that. Because if you create a plan that you think that that person wants, and then you present it to them, and they're like, I don't really want to do that, then are you going to have a whole lot of buy-in? No. So I know that there's a severity of autism and everything, but for as much as possible, you really want to include the person with autism within the planning for the future, because then what happens is it gives them an incentive. And you can always look back to that. Hey, you said you wanted to learn how to make a sandwich so you can be independent. Come on, let's make a sandwich. This is for you. This is for your future, right? So you have that buy-in. It also helps you direct how you're going to use your time, your energy, your money. Start teaching independent living skills absolutely right now. And then building relationships, constantly building relationships with people. Because unpaid friendship is really important. Could you imagine if all of your friends were people who were paid to be with you? How would that make you feel? It's really important to have unpaid friendship, but that takes work. Being able to organize with other people, coming together in grassroots organizing, because you can share support visuals, right? You can share scripts, you can share stories. Commit to being an advocate, to raising the collective awareness. Even if it's just creating a small monthly meeting where you're going to commit to come together every month, and you might not know what you're going to talk about, but at least you're going to come together, and then things will continue to brew. And then sharing information with others. If something were to happen to you, and you had 5 minutes, in 5 minutes I was going to remove you from the face of the earth, what is it that everyone else has to know about your son or daughter, or about the person you work with? What is it about their lives that are so important? You only have 5 minutes to tell me what I need to know about this person to make sure they have a high quality life, right? Maybe it's they only like their tea black. They don't like it with any milk, and if you give them tea with milk, it's going to ruin their morning. I don't know what it is. But we all have things that can either break or make things, right? My son can't have any tags in his clothes, right? He only likes to wear red on Saturdays. These little things can create meltdowns, and so being able to have a list of things, just in case anything happened to you that can give someone a little extra start in the future, is really important. I encourage you all to visit the Autism Housing Network. There's a lot of resources on there. I love talking about autism in adulthood. I love talking about housing. I believe so strongly with everything in me that you're going to create the India Autism Center. And it's because you're working together. I can see it. You're bringing people from all over the world, right? You're bringing this whole conference together. And that's what's needed. It's needed all of us working together for the future. And that's it.